Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive.
Always exciting to be back.
So today we're going to be looking at something pretty wild.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. We've got this set of texts that basically lay out a potential roadmap for like a whole new kind of society.
Hmm.
And it gets into all sorts of things like universal basic income, sustainability, even how we govern ourselves, like participatory democracy.
Wow. That's a pretty wide range.
It is, it is.
So where do we even begin with all that?
Well, I think what's really interesting is the overall tone of these texts.
Okay, what do you mean?
Like, they're not just pointing out all the problems with the way things are now.
Right.
They're actually offering solutions.
Yeah, I noticed that too.
Like, really concrete, and I gotta say,
Right.
pretty radical ideas.
It's refreshing, isn't it?
Totally.
Instead of just doom and gloom, it's like, hey, let's actually try to build something better.
Exactly.
Okay, so where do we start?
Well, let's start with one of the biggest questions these texts tackle. How do we ensure everyone has some level of economic security, especially in a world where automation and AI are, changing the job market so rapidly?
Right, that's the million-dollar question these days.
And that's where universal basic income comes in.
RBU.
Yeah, RBU, as we'll call it.
Which is basically...
It's the idea that everyone, no matter what their job situation is, gets a regular payment from the government.
just like a base level of income to cover basic needs.
Exactly.
Interesting.
And the texts explore different ways to fund this, like taxing automation.
Oh, I've heard that idea before.
Yeah, it's getting some traction.
Makes sense. If robots are taking over jobs, they should contribute to the system, right?
Right.
And what other funding mechanisms do they talk about?
Well, some suggest shifting our current social welfare spending,
Hmm.
sort of like reallocating resources.
Interesting.
So instead of having all these separate programs, it would all go into one universal system.
I see.
What do you think about that?
I think it's worth exploring. I mean, there are definitely challenges, but the idea of a safety net for everyone is appealing.
Totally.
Especially with all this anxiety about robots taking jobs, maybe RBU could be part of the solution.
Exactly.
Instead of fearing unemployment, we could embrace automation as a way to, free up our time and energy for other things.
Yeah, like what if work wasn't just about earning a paycheck?
Right.
What if it was about pursuing your passions, contributing to your community, or just, exploring what makes you happy?
Wow, that's a pretty different way of looking at things.
It is, and these texts suggest that RBU could actually lead to a shift in our values.
Like redefining what it means to have a fulfilling life.
Exactly.
That's fascinating.
I know, it's a pretty radical departure from the work till you drop mentality that a lot of us are used to.
For sure.
But think about it.
Okay, I'm thinking.
Imagine having the time and resources to write that novel you've always dreamed of,
Or finally learn to play the guitar.
or volunteer for a cause you're passionate about.
Yeah, those are all great examples.
I mean, what would you do if you didn't have to worry about making ends meet?
So many possibilities.
Right?
It's a question worth pondering.
Evidently.
But of course, there are challenges with RBU, too.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like, how do you fund it sustainably?
Right.
How do you prevent inflation?
Yeah.
And what about the potential social stigma towards people who choose not to work?
Those are all really important questions.
They are.
And these texts delve into some potential solutions, like a tiered RBU system, where the amount you receive varies based on your needs
Wow, interesting.
or your contributions to society.
I see. So it's not just a one-size-fits-all approach.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
And they also emphasize the need for careful economic modeling and monitoring.
Right, you got to make sure it's sustainable and fair.
Absolutely.
But RBU is just one piece of the puzzle, right?
Right.
These texts also talk about a more sustainable and ethical economy.
Yeah, like moving toward a circular economy.
That's what
It's about using and reusing resources in a closed loop, so you minimize waste and pollution.
I see, like taking reduce, reuse, recycle to a whole new level.
Exactly.
Interesting.
And they suggest AI and automation could play a key role in this.
How so?
Well, imagine robots sorting and recycling materials super efficiently, or AI optimizing supply chains to minimize waste.
That's pretty cool.
It is, right.
So instead of fearing robots, we could see them as partners in creating a more sustainable future.
Exactly.
But how realistic is all this?
That's a good question.
I mean, can we really transform our entire economic system?
Well, the texts actually offer some examples of how a circular economy is already happening in certain industries.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like some fashion companies are experimenting with clothing rental programs and designing clothes that can be easily disassembled and recycled.
Wow, that's impressive.
It is, right.
So it's not just a pie in the sky idea, it's actually starting to happen.
Exactly. And with the right policies and investments, they argue we could scale these efforts up and create a truly sustainable system.
That would be amazing.
It would.
But it's not just about changing production, it's also about changing consumption, right?
Totally.
Like, how would our buying habits change if we knew products were designed to be repaired and reused?
Yeah, would we be willing to pay more for things that last longer?
Those are great questions.
They are.
And they get to the heart of this cultural shift that these texts are talking about.
It's not just about technology. It's about our values and priorities.
Absolutely.
And speaking of values, they also address the issue of wealth inequality.
Yeah, that's a huge one. And it's probably going to get worse with automation.
Right. And their solution is pretty radical.
What do they propose?
A regulated capitalist system
Okay.
with limits on how much wealth individuals can accumulate.
Interesting.
So things like a maximum wage cap,
Okay.
progressive taxation, even a wealth tax.
Wow, that's a pretty big departure from the trickle-down economics we've seen for so long.
It is. It is.
So they're not talking about abolishing capitalism entirely.
Right.
It's more about putting some guardrails in place
Exactly.
to prevent extreme concentration of wealth and make sure everyone benefits from economic progress.
Exactly.
That makes sense, especially with AI and automation potentially making things even more unequal.
Right. But of course, there are a lot of questions about how this would actually work.
For sure, like what's a fair wage gap?
Yeah.
How do you prevent capital flight?
Right.
And wouldn't this stifle innovation?
These are all valid concerns.
Definitely.
And the texts acknowledge that it would be complex to implement.
Yeah, I bet.
But they argue that the benefits of a more equitable society outweigh the potential drawbacks.
It's a fascinating debate for sure.
It is.
And it's one we need to have.
Absolutely.
Welcome back, everyone.
All right, so we've been talking about some pretty big ideas.
Yeah, no kidding.
Universal basic income, circular economy, regulating capitalism.
A lot to unpack.
It is.
But there's one element that keeps coming up in these texts.
What's that?
The role of AI and robots.
Oh, yeah. They're kind of like the wild card in all this.
Right.
They could either make things a lot better.
Or a lot worse.
Exactly.
So let's dig into that a little bit.
Okay, sounds good.
Starting with how AI and robots might impact universal basic income.
Okay, yeah, one text specifically mentioned a tax on automation as a way to fund RBU.
Right. The idea being that if businesses are using robots to replace human workers and increase profits,
Yeah,
then a portion of those gains could be taxed to fund the RBU.
makes sense in a way.
It's like acknowledging that robots are contributing to the economy
Yeah.
and should therefore contribute to the social safety net.
So the robots are chipping in to help cover everyone's basic needs.
Exactly.
That's pretty interesting.
It is.
But a lot of people worry that automation is going to lead to mass unemployment, social unrest.
Oh, absolutely. That's a huge concern.
How do these texts address that?
Well, they argue that instead of fearing job displacement,
Okay.
we should see it as an opportunity.
An opportunity.
Yeah, think about it.
Okay.
Automation could free us from all that tedious, repetitive work.
Yeah, the stuff nobody really wants to do.
Right, and that would allow us to focus on more creative, more fulfilling things.
I mean, it sounds great in theory.
It does.
But what if someone genuinely enjoys those tasks that are being automated?
That's a good point.
Like, what if they don't want to do something else?
Well, that's where individual choice comes in.
Okay.
These models aren't about forcing people into certain roles.
Right.
They're about providing the freedom and resources to pursue what they find fulfilling.
Okay, I see.
So if someone loves data entry,
Yeah.
they can keep doing it,
Uh-huh.
but they'll also have the option to explore other interests.
Okay, so it's about expanding options, not limiting them.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
Okay, good.
All right, so let's move on to another model. The social and solidarity economy, or ESS, as the texts call it.
Right. ES.
How do AI and robots fit into that?
Well, one text talked about how robots could help with tasks in social services,
What?
like elder care, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Robots could help with things like lifting and moving patients.
Oh, so the physical stuff.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
Which would then free up human caregivers to focus on the emotional support, the companionship.
Yeah, that's really important, especially as the population ages.
It is.
And the demand for caregiving increases.
Right. And it's not just elder care.
Okay. Well,
Robots could help in education,
Hmm.
healthcare, environmental conservation, all sorts of areas.
Wow.
Imagine robots cleaning up pollution.
Or planting trees.
Yeah, or AI systems that personalize learning for students.
It's like we're talking about using technology to enhance what humans can do,
Exactly.
not replace us entirely.
You got it.
That's a much more optimistic way of looking at it.
I think so too.
Okay, so we've talked about robots and AI in terms of RBU and ESS.
Yes.
What about their role in a regulated capitalist system?
Well, one text suggested AI could actually help regulate the economy.
Really?
Yeah, to ensure a fairer distribution of wealth.
How would that even work?
Imagine AI systems that constantly monitor economic activity.
Well-
They could identify potential bubbles,
Oh, wow.
prevent monopolies, even flag instances of tax evasion.
So it's like using AI to keep things fair
Precisely.
and prevent the kind of greed that often leads to economic crises.
Right. And AI could also optimize tax policies
Okay.
to make sure the wealthy are paying their fair share
Mm-hmm.
and that resources are going towards things that benefit everyone.
That's a pretty bold idea.
It is.
But who would control these AI systems?
That's a big question, right?
Yeah. How do we make sure they're not manipulated to benefit certain groups?
That's where things get tricky.
Yeah.
And the texts emphasize the need for transparency,
Okay.
accountability, ethical considerations.
Right. It's not just about the tech itself. It's about how it's used.
That's it.
And who benefits.
Right.
It's a lot to think about.
It is, but it's an important conversation to have.
Definitely.
Okay, so we've touched on how these different models, RBU, ESS, regulated capitalism,
Yeah.
could potentially work together.
To create a more balanced society.
Right, but there are a lot of details to figure out.
Oh, for sure. Tons of potential pitfalls.
Yeah, but that's what makes this so interesting.
It does.
These texts aren't meant to be blueprints.
Right.
They're starting points for a much bigger conversation.
Okay, I like that.
It's an invitation to think critically.
About the future we want.
Exactly.
All right, before we move on,
Yeah.
let's circle back to one point that keeps coming up.
Okay.
This idea of humans being freed from work.
Oh, yeah, the big one.
It sounds great on paper,
It does.
but what would we actually do with all that extra time?
That is the question, isn't it?
Like, how would we find meaning and purpose in a world where work isn't the center of everything?
Well, the texts offer some possibilities.
Okay, like what?
They talk about a resurgence of creativity, a
Mhm.
focus on community building,
Mhm.
people exploring their passions, their interests.
So it's about shifting our values
Right.
from a work-centric
Yes.
culture
Yeah.
to one that prioritizes well-being, connection, self-discovery.
Exactly.
It's a pretty profound shift.
It is.
And it raises a question for all of us.
Okay.
What would you do with your time if you didn't have to work?
What passions would you pursue?
What contributions would you make to your community?
Something worth thinking about.
It really is.
Okay. Ready to move on?
Yeah, let's talk about democracy. Okay, so welcome back to our final part of this deep dive. And, we've talked about a lot.
Oh, yeah.
Economic security,
Big
the
build.
whole changing nature of work.
Big stuff?
It is big stuff.
Yeah.
But now I want to get into something that I find super fascinating.
Okay, what's that?
How these texts envision the future of, like, democracy.
Ooh. Okay, yeah. Democracy in the age of AI. Right.
Exactly.
That's a big one.
It is.
And kind of a scary one, honestly.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, what happens when technology gets too involved in how we govern ourselves?
Well, that's exactly what these texts try to address.
Okay, so what do they say?
They actually suggest that AI could help us govern more effectively.
More effectively. I'm skeptical, but go on.
So it's not about replacing human decision makers,
Okay.
but about augmenting their capabilities.
Like giving them better tools and information.
Exactly.
Okay, I can see that.
So imagine a world where, like, complex data analysis,
Mm-hmm.
simulations, resource allocation, all that stuff
Yeah.
is handled by AI,
Okay.
providing insights and potential solutions to human leaders.
So it's like having a superpowered advisor,
Exactly.
crunching numbers, predicting outcomes.
Yeah.
That would take humans forever to figure out. I
Right.
mean, that could be incredibly valuable, especially with issues like climate change,
Oh, absolutely.
pandemics, global economic shifts, all that stuff.
Yeah, the big complex
Yeah,
stuff
right.
where it's hard to see the whole picture.
And AI could help connect the dots, right?
Yeah, potentially.
Identify the most effective interventions.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm starting to see the potential here,
Right.
but it still makes me a little uneasy, you know?
I get it.
Like, what's the point of human leaders if an AI can just tell us the right answer?
That's a really good point, and the texts do address that concern.
Okay, good.
they're very clear that final decisions would still rest with humans.
Okay.
AI can provide information, recommendations, all that,
Uh,
but it's still up to us
right.
to consider the ethical implications,
Yeah.
the social implications, the political
The
implications.
human side of things.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes me feel a little better.
So it's like AI can handle the what,
Yeah,
but humans are still essential for the why and the how.
I like that.
It's a good way to put it.
Yeah, it is.
And this kind of collaborative approach could lead to, a more responsive government, one that can actually deal with these complex problems.
More effectively.
Right, more effectively.
Interesting.
But these texts also talk about participatory democracy,
Right, which is a
the
thing.
idea that citizens should have a more direct role in decision-making.
Okay.
And they suggest that technology, specifically AI, could actually facilitate that.
Okay, how so?
So imagine AI-powered platforms
Okay.
that allow people to share their opinions,
Uh-huh.
vote on policies,
Yeah.
even propose solutions to community issues.
So it's like taking the town hall meeting concept and making it digital
Exactly.
and global.
Right, much broader participation.
And AI could help make sure everyone's voice is heard, right?
That's the idea.
Like, even those who are traditionally marginalized or excluded.
Yeah, AI could identify and elevate those perspectives.
That's pretty cool.
It is.
It's like using technology to make democracy more inclusive.
Exactly.
I like that.
Yeah, it's a pretty radical vision, I gotta say.
It is.
But is it realistic?
That's the question.
I mean, are people really that interested in being so involved in politics?
Good point.
And wouldn't all this just lead to information overload?
Decision fatigue.
Yeah.
Well, the texts acknowledge these concerns.
Okay.
They emphasize the need for user-friendly interfaces.
Right.
Well-designed systems that make participation meaningful and manageable.
Okay, that makes sense.
So it's not about bombarding people with information.
Yeah.
It's about giving them the tools they need to engage in a way that's empowering and effective.
Makes sense.
And they argue that our current systems
Yeah.
often leave people feeling powerless and disconnected.
I could definitely see that.
So maybe a more direct, more accessible approach
Yeah.
could actually rekindle people's interest in shaping their communities.
That's an interesting thought.
It is.
It's like if you give people a real voice,
Uh-huh.
a sense of ownership,
Yeah,
that could be really powerful.
absolutely.
And this ties into another big theme in these texts,
What's that?
continuous education.
Oh, right. Lifelong learning.
Yeah, they envision a world where learning isn't just something you do in school.
Oh.
It's a constant process,
Yeah.
facilitated by technology and tailored to your individual needs.
So you're constantly upskilling,
Yeah.
learning new things,
Adapting to the changing
but
world.
all at your own pace in a way that's engaging and relevant to your life.
Exactly.
That sounds pretty amazing.
It does.
It's a far cry from the education system most of us grew up with.
It is.
That whole standardized testing, rote memorization thing.
Yeah, not exactly inspiring.
Not at all.
But, let's be real.
Well-
These texts also acknowledge the potential downsides of all this technology.
Of course, there are always risks.
Right.
And they emphasize the need for ethical guidelines,
Mm-hmm.
responsible development,
Yeah.
ongoing conversations about the potential impacts of AI.
We can't just blindly embrace it.
Exactly. Technology is a tool.
Yeah.
And like any tool, it can be used for good or bad.
It all comes back to responsibility, right?
It does.
We have to be thoughtful about how we develop and use AI.
Absolutely.
Make sure it's serving humanity, not the other way around.
Couldn't agree more.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
what's the takeaway message for our listeners?
Well, I think these texts challenge us to imagine a future where technology, economics, and social values are all working together.
Not against each other.
Right.
It's like a call to dream big,
Yeah.
to ask bold questions, to have these conversations about how we can create a better world.
A more equitable world, a more sustainable world, a more fulfilling world.
Exactly.
It's a hopeful vision,
It is.
but it also requires us to be pragmatic.
Yeah.
We have to think about the complexities, the potential pitfalls.
The challenges of actually making these ideas a reality.
Right. It's not going to be easy.
But ultimately, it's a reminder that the future is not set in stone.
We have the power to shape it
Through our choices, our actions, our willingness to imagine something better.
and to work towards it.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, there you have it, folks.
That's our deep dive for today.
Hope you enjoyed it.
We hope it's given you some food for thought.
And maybe even inspired you to get involved in shaping the future.
Thanks for listening.